What is Holy Monday? Holy Monday is the day after the Palm Sunday parade, where Jesus walks into the temple and starts breaking things. He overturns the money changers' tables. Coins hit the floor and roll in every direction. Doves escape from toppled cages. Merchants shout and scramble to salvage their goods while Jesus stands in the chaos, and he is mad as a hornet. This isn't the gentle, meek, non-threatening shepherd we sing about. This is the Son of God initiating a major disruption, confrontation, the kind of scene that makes everyone uncomfortable because we prefer our Jesus measured and mild. But if we look closely at what's actually happening, we see something more complex than mere anger. Jewish pilgrims coming to Jerusalem for Passover needed to offer sacrifices and pay the temple tax. Reasonable enough. But the religious authorities had built a system around these requirements that turned worship into a transaction heavily weighted and biased against the poor. Exchange rates were inflated. Animals for sacrifice cost far more inside the temple courts than they should have. The whole enterprise enriched the religious elite while burdening the very people it claimed to serve. Worse still, this marketplace had taken over the court of the Gentiles, the one space where non-Jews could come to pray and seek the God of Israel. What should have been a house of prayer for all nations had become a noisy bazaar that communicated a clear message. Your access to God has a price. We control it, and you must pay it. So Jesus disrupts the whole scene, not because he's lost control, but because this kind of exploitation cannot stand. Not in his Father's house, not in the place meant to welcome people into God's presence. The tables flip because love sometimes requires confrontation. It's fair to say that on Holy Monday, Jesus lost his cool without losing his character. It was all very measured and intentional. We need to be careful here. This story gets weaponized constantly, people imagining themselves as righteous table flippers, cleaning house and setting things straight. But Jesus wasn't venting frustration or even emphasizing his own authority. He was protecting people who had no voice and no power to push back against a system designed to exploit them. The vulnerable, the poor pilgrims who'd traveled far and couldn't afford the inflated prices, the Gentiles who'd been pushed to the margins and told their prayers mattered less than the profit-making ventures of the God merchants. Jesus looked at a system built to profit from people's desperation to meet God, and he tore it down. This reveals something crucial about what actually provokes Jesus most strongly. Throughout the Gospels, he shows remarkable patience with broken people, with doubters and failures and obvious sinners. He eats with tax collectors. He defends a woman caught in adultery. He promises paradise to a lifetime thief dying right next to him. But when religious leaders use God's name to harm others, when systems of faith become instruments of control or exclusion or lining pockets, when the vulnerable are crushed under religious expectations while the powerful benefit, that's when Jesus acts. That's when Jesus bows up. That's when Jesus gets fierce. Because religion is supposed to help people encounter God, not keep them away. It's supposed to bear witness to grace, not build barriers. It's supposed to serve and lift burdens from the least of these, not extract resources from them. But when religion does the opposite, when it becomes a gatekeeper rather than a guide, when it builds walls instead of opening doors, it betrays everything it exists to accomplish. So where does this leave us? It means we have to ask some uncomfortable questions, not in a performative or accusatory way, but honestly. Where do our churches and systems make it harder for people to encounter Jesus? Where do we place conditions on grace that Jesus would denounce? Where do we protect institutions at the expense of individuals who get hurt in the process? Maybe it's how we treat people whose lives don't fit our cultural expectations. Maybe it's the gap between what we say about things like welcome, hospitality, and belonging, and who actually feels safe in our communities. Maybe it's how we've tied faithful Christianity to political allegiance, or economic comfort, or social respectability, or zip codes of residence in ways that have nothing to do with the gospel. Jesus didn't flip tables because people were imperfect. He flipped them because a system claimed to represent God, while actively and passively crushing people in God's name. And if we're honest, that still happens. Sometimes obviously, sometimes subtly. In ways we participate without realizing. In ways that make us more complicit than we want to admit. Holy Monday reminds us that love isn't always gentle. Sometimes love is fierce. Sometimes it disrupts. Sometimes it has to dismantle what's broken and contaminated before anything good and life-giving can be built. But it's still love, protective, costly, uncompromising love for people who've been pushed aside and told they don't measure up. The religious leaders saw Jesus' actions as violence against sacred space, but Jesus saw their system as violence against sacred people. And when forced to choose between protecting institutions and brick and mortar versus protecting the vulnerable, he chose people. Every time. Maybe we should be just as unwilling to let religion become a weapon or a tool for selfish gain. Just as quick to notice when systems meant to serve people end up serving themselves instead. Just as willing to disrupt what needs disrupting, even when it makes a mess. The tables flip because Jesus refuses to let anyone use his Father's house to exploit his Father's children or disregard the Father's vulnerable. And 2,000 years later, that refusal still stands, not as permission for self-righteous anger, but as a reminder that love always protects, that access to God is not for sale, that the vulnerable matter more than the systems and institutions we've built. Holy Monday shows us a Jesus who gets angry, not at broken sinners, but at the religious machinery that grinds them down. And maybe that's exactly the kind of anger we need more of.